Hello, everybody! Welcome to another episode of Reacting Reddit, where real humans read, react, and summarize trending content and stories. And today, we're doing a story. Vampclaw asked a great question. What is that one book that absolutely changed your life? And we have thousands of answers. We're only going to be looking at the longer, more in-detailed ones. Let's get to it. First one is by Princess Diana FP+. I loved Redwall so much. Me too, by the way. It was a series I started reading with book 1, and then got to excitedly wait for the next installations. Those moments with a fantasy series that is aimed at kids are kind of precious to me in a world where most of the books I was required to read as a child were published well before I was born. But I suppose we live in a Harry Potter world, largely where that which was given for a lot of people's childhoods. Are you excited about the new Netflix series? Badgers are f***ing scary. We used to have problems with them on our farm. One of our dogs got mauled, and I got chased by one while I was riding my bike as a kid. I remember riding back out with my dad to where it was, and we stood in the bed of a pickup truck as he blasted it with a shotgun, and it took like 7 or 8 shots to kill it. They are tough bastards. Don't f*** with badgers. I think that was a Redwall reference. Redwall is a story about these, it's a fantasy world. Think about, medieval fantasy, except instead of humans, everybody's mice. And the enemies are, owls and stuff. That's Redwall. And it's really good. Great books. I loved them, too. Istara says, I enjoyed the first 3. I thought the 4th was overly long and essentially Mary Sue. Thereafter, I thought various random deaths were out of tone with the first half of the series, and she appeared to be trying to position it as something more deep, dark, and epic than it ever had the potential to be. When I first read the epilogue, leaked as scanned PDFs online, it was quite a scandal at the time. I genuinely thought it was a hoax and was actually pretty mediocre fanfic. I still maintain the first 3 books are excellent, and she should have kept to that level and tone. Princess Diana says, it's fantasy! It's practically Xanth meets The Worst Witch, meets Chestromancy meets Discworld. Blend it together, skim off the good stuff, and add some of your own ingredients. Does she think she created entirely in a vacuum and there weren't tropes everywhere? Is she just an asshole on all levels? Did she think she invented some new genre or something? The Harry Potter books are very, very fun. They mean a lot to a lot of people. But beyond being the cultural phenomenon that hit like lightning in a bottle, they're still fantasy. Hell, maybe the dark tone of the later books was her struggling with her secret desire to let Voldemort win, and not actually a plot device meant to draw the reader in and provide a more fitting climax to the story. Shadow Socks says... Shadow Socks says, one of my earliest memories was listening to this story at Story Hour at the library as a 3-year-old and being absolutely terrified. I was crying by the end, and the librarian sat down and talked with me about not needing to be afraid. And then she gave me the book! I was absolutely horrified. Having basically no possessions at that age, getting a gift was a huge deal. And to be honest, my first thought was, great, now I can't escape this terrible thing. But the librarian's generosity and investment in me, genuinely overcoming my fear, just floored me. And 20 years later, I still have the book. That's so cool. Harry Potter 29 says, I have to give credit to my mom. An imperfect person in several aspects, but man, she could act out Grover in that book. His fear, his desperation, oof. She nailed it. His disbelief and astonishment, his feeble recognition that you are very strong, and his mounting terror, she could emote all of that out at the bat of a heck. I had a ball going through that book with her, particularly once I realized that the monster at the end was nothing to be afraid of. It gives a 2-year-old an immense sense of power to turn pages against Grover's will. And, best of all, to help teach him that his fears are baseless. That's funny. Honestly, this book is how I learned to be anxious. I was a terrified child every time I read the book. I didn't feel brave. I just felt it was inevitable that I would turn the page. So I did it. After a few minutes of imagining what kind of monster awaited me, it turns out that belief that the book could change might have been a sign of dissociative issues and a bad omen for my relationship with my mom. Huh. What? Alright, this next comment. We have an issue sometimes where there's replies to stuff that we haven't mentioned. So they're talking about a children's book called Grover's, I think? Let's see. Grover's Children's Book. Whoa. Monster. Oh, okay, so it's literally a Sesame Street book. Starring Grover. Okay, so they talk about a monster at the end and make you imagine how... That's really interesting. I want to bookmark that. Sounds like something to study. Oh, Jack Black meme blowing his mind for 10 minutes! It's actually only like 6 seconds or something, but it seems like forever. Next reply is by Yeet Me into K-Space. The idea that information travels at or slower than the speed of light. If you draw spatial distance on one axis and time elapsed on the other, then a light cone is the chunk of the past that would have reached this moment using that speed limit, or the chunk of the future for this moment could reach that using that speed limit. Okay, I don't give a fuck about that. That has nothing to do with the book. I'm gonna skip it. MadCunt2250 says, The Easy Way to Stop Smoking by Alan Carr. I had zero intention to stop smoking when I started to read that book. Huh. To say I was skeptical about it would be an understatement. I was a heavy chain smoker. I smoked more than anyone I know. But when I went cold turkey after I read it, 3 years strong, I have not had a single puff since I finished that book. If you smoke, you want to read the book now. I wish I had read it earlier. Now I want to read that book, jeez. Great Apple says, it breaks down the lies you tell yourself as a smoker. The addiction convinces you of things like you enjoy the taste, or it gives you something to break, or it relieves your stress. It gives you a break during the day, etc. The book breaks down why all of that is a lie. Like why you wouldn't you enjoy a break more if you didn't have to put on a coat on and shoes and go huddle outside in the rain sucking down smoke, and instead just stretched and shut your eyes for 10 minutes? Doesn't it add stress to your life to be at an event where you have to find smokes, and when you can't, you get all cranky because of the craving, needing to fit in a stop at the store on your way home to get a new pack, always needing to plan out cigarette breaks during your day, having less money because you're spending it on cigarettes? Stuff like that. It sounds simple, and it is. But when you have an addiction, you convince yourself of a lot of bullshit, and the book breaks down very thoroughly why it's all bullshit. It's not a miracle cure the way a lot of like hypnotists or other people claim, but it does make you truly want to quit smoking. Instead of feeling like you have to quit smoking for your health, or for your wallet, or for your kids, or whatever. It educates you instead of obligating you. Fork25 says, I think it has a cumulative effect as you progress through the book. The book is an amazing blend of terrible writing and repetitive passages that kind of hypnotizes you into thinking about why you smoke and concluding that the only reason you want to smoke is because you smoke. I don't know how it works, but it worked for me. A pack a day for years, 15 years, my wife and I both quit after we read it. I recommend it to anybody who tells me that they want to quit. I like how he didn't say I recommend it to anybody who smokes, instead saying I recommend it to anybody who tells me that who initiates that they have an interest in quitting their smoking habit. The Apiary says, recently I had an MRI of my head and I knew it was really safe, but I started to feel a little claustrophobic in there. If you tell them you're freaking out, they'll stop the test and let you out, but I wanted them to look at my head, so that really wasn't the goal. And all of a sudden, it just pops into my head, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass through me and over me. When it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see fear's path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And I was like, what the fuck, brain? You've been keeping that in there? Why do you still know that? But on the other hand, it still works, so... Drew is Awesome 14 adds, it's definitely a slow burn. I bought it a while ago and read only a few chapters before putting it down. I kept trying to find other sci-fi titles to read, and every list had Dune at the top and marked it as an essential in the genre. So I decided to give it another shot. It's so worth it. It's super slow for about 100 pages, but then it gets really interesting. About halfway through is when bulls go to the wall insane, and it's hard to put down. It took me a long time, 3 weeks to get through the first half of the book, and then maybe 5 days to finish the second half, if that's any indication of how good it gets. Thungri says, true, but if you read like that and then go back and start from the beginning, it gives context for all that Dune is doing to subvert the Messianic figure trope. It's easy for a lot of people to read Dune and then go to Dune Messiah and get confused and disheartened for why things are so dismal. Children of Dune is the book where it's actually transitioning to a deeper time scale of perspective on human psychology and sociology that is ridiculously prescient and relevant. This user, Ethanol, adds Moss, the first and only graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize. It's a book about a second-generation survivor of the Holocaust retelling his father's memoirs of the event. His father's memoirs, I guess? The semi-biographic book puts into perspective the whole feeling of absolute terror and gives us insight on the before-after situation. The Jews are portrayed as mouses and the Nazis as cats, elaborating on the whole cat and mouse chase premise, which demonstrates the horrors the Jews felt. Although it is a graphic novel, its images do really say more than words. It is to this day the only book which has made me cry and feel hurt. It makes the whole subject feel very personal. I would argue that if you haven't cried or felt hurt from reading, you haven't read enough books. Interesting. Such a great book, says Sharon Siren Song. The part that sticks out for me the most was the relationship that the author had with his parents, which was so clearly suffering the byproduct of attachment injury. When he explained feeling like he could never measure up to his dead brother, especially because the brother died as a toddler. Oof. And the line about not knowing what sibling rivalry is because his rival is a ghost, it gets me every time. But the whole book is tragic and beautiful, and the fact that it's a true story really amplifies the grasp on the heartstrings for me. Gonna keep going. Don't want to read a bunch of stuff about the same books, because we want to find other books that people really like. Here we have a little bit too many responses here. Okay, this next book that someone loves by Brown and Down says, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. An incredible sci-fi book that was written in the 80s and is a mix of apocalypse fiction, socio-political critique, and resilience. It completely changed my worldview and put me on the path to sustainable off-grid living, which I'm very grateful for. I also equally love the sequel, Parable of the Talents, and there's an amazing podcast called Octavia's Parables that came out last year, which goes through each chapter of the book. I recommend it for anyone thinking about starting the book or rereading it. It's like being in a book club that goes at your own pace. Another comment on the book, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. For me, it means living in a way that communes with and supports the earth as much as I am supported by the earth. So I've been saving money and learning skills such as woodworking, food preservation, farming, fishing, herbal medicine, etc. that will help me eventually do a couple main things. 1. Mill my own lumber that is sourced from already fallen trees, and build my own home and other homes for my friends, with help of course. Ideally, I'd like my home to be solar powered, but that's cost prohibitive, so I'm learning about natural ways to cool and heat the home. as well as how to get fresh, potable water into the home for drinking, cooking, and bathing. I'd also love how to learn how to get natural metals from rocks and learn metalworking without machinery. I haven't looked into it yet, but I'm sure it exists. Well, yeah, I mean, it's totally possible. You're literally talking about what a blacksmith is. Like, if you want to get metal out of rocks, though, you're very limited to the kinds of stuff available. Because usually you have to use machines to get deep into the earth to find the right kind of metal. So you could pick a geographical region where metals are known to be on the surface, basically. And then, if you can get the ore, you can get it to metal without machines, because you can make a forge. And the biggest thing with a forge is, how do you get the temperature to be hot enough? So you need to construct, I mean, you're not building machines, but you basically need to be able to make a very, 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 very hot fire. And in order to do that, you need to construct a bellows to blow air into the fire to increase the rate of oxygen, so that the fire can get hot enough to actually, forge and melt metals and that kind of thing. But you don't actually need a whole lot to metalsmith. And you can watch tons of videos on YouTube about forging and blacksmithing. And again, the hard part is getting the ore. Once you have the ore, then it's totally possible to convert it into useful metal things through a lot of hard work. You don't need like fancy electronics or machines. That being said, getting the ore, that's really hard. On the same land, I'd like to have a large farm, a garden, and a couple of animals, also growing cotton and other plants that can be used to make clothing, beds, blankets, etc. I'd like to learn a lot about how to live off the land while also contributing to the health of the ecosystem. Beekeeping, planting trees and veggies that aren't invasive, sustainable fishing, etc. The last and most important part of sustainable living for me is community. I want wherever I live to be a communal space that is physically accessible and functions outside of capitalism. I also want to live in a way that acknowledges that the US is stolen land, and ideally I'd live in a community with indigenous tribes who I'd be living near, especially since a lot of the practices I'm learning are from indigenous people who've lived sustainably for ages. Sorry for the long response, but that's what it means to me. Perfect. Why do people apologize for long responses? They're so much better than short responses, at least the ones on Reddit. Alright, next favorite book. This is by Dars Int. Out of all the people I've asked that question, okay, I don't know what that's in response to that. Let's move forward. Alright. Andromeda 321 says, when I was 13 years old, I had a long school bus ride from school, almost an hour long, and I would pass that time by reading. One day I was in the library frantic for something because I had no book, and I picked out an astronomy one that was called From the Big Bang to Planet X by Terence Dickinson, and had a fetching picture of the Andromeda Galaxy on its cover. That book, wow. I was completely enchanted about outer space, and by the time I was done reading it, I knew I wanted to be an astronomer. I remember thinking about the stars and thinking at the time how fantastical it was that people could have that job. But anyone who was an astronomer was 13 once, and this was a thing you could do, even if you lived in Pittsburgh. Anyway, that was over 20 years ago, and there were many twists and turns along the way, but I'm now 2 years into working as a professional astronomer. I just submitted a paper last week on a black hole that ripped apart a star, which was super fun to work on, and I couldn't help but think about how a lot of excited 13-year-old me would have been to see how my paper's going. I don't know if she would have believed it. That's so cool. And their username is Andromeda 321. Classic. Totally classic. What are we at? 19 minutes. We can read one more answer. I'm actually just gonna skip all of these replies to the replies. Alright. So, Angry Latin Chanting says, From the Big Bang to Planet X by Terence Dickinson. I'm like 90% positive this book is one of the first nonfiction astronomy space books I picked up in grade school. This would have been around 1994 or 1995, or shortly after the book was published. The inspiration and the imagination that it sparked cannot be overstated. It gave me a perspective on my place in the universe, and that was so necessary at the time. The inspiration and imagination it sparked cannot be overstated. Space and science topics were what pressed me to keep reading, where I previously had no real interest. I began taking out 5 to 7 books a week from the local library, and would say it's largely responsible for elevating my thinking and all other success I've had in life. It also helped me contextualize childhood war trauma, and let me see that there is more to life than people being horrible to each other. I was able to go atheist at an early age, and find inner peace even under difficult family circumstances. All thanks to reading. It also made me want to be an astronomer as well, and even got my parents to buy me a small telescope for Christmas later that year. In the end, I persuaded a more practical passion with tech, after I came to terms with the difficult or limited job market for astronomers. But otherwise, I still read about that space, and almost on daily basis, I keep up with the latest developments as much as I can. I also go 500 kilometers up north to dark skies yearly for astrophotography, and am generally well steeped in sci-fi. I'm wondering now if you were involved in the research around Cygnus X1, because some recent info suggested it was also the fastest spinning black hole we found, and I know that that's one of the most famous and well cases of a black hole consuming a star. As for my answer to the thread, I don't really have one specific book, but once I got into the space science stuff, I found works from Asimov and Carl Sagan to be fantastic. Alright everybody, if you like this kind of content, please do one of the 4 following. Watch another one of our videos, like this video, comment below, or subscribe to our channel. And if you really like our content and you want to make something like it yourself, please reach out to us. Send us an email by getting our email from this YouTube channel on the About page. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. See you next time. Ciao!